Well, hey, welcome to Afterthoughts with Kaylee and Lee. And it's Kaylee and Lee again.
Yay!
We've had guest speakers for a bit. And that's been nice to get back to Kaylee and Lee. So that's good. The Roman series has been kicked off.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought Aiden did a great job last week.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're getting into the specifics. And I will say right off the hop when we talk about Romans, this is a book we could spend years in, not weeks. It is a beast. And I have heard of churches I think Tim Keller did a Roman series at his church, and it was years long, like 2 years long or something. And I've heard of it also. Even talked to Pastor Larry. We were talking about my ordination stuff. And so he asked me what we were working on, and I said Romans. And so then we reminisced about he did 1 Corinthians for an entire year here. So we've done that here, and it's maybe something down the road as we continue to lean into mission and vision, and we lean into, the rhythm of church and all that, to find something that we can kind of sit in for a year, but that also fits our yearly rhythms.
Right.
Would be kind of neat, actually.
Yeah.
I almost think of it like doing a book for an entire year, but having multiple series.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Right?
Yeah.
Like you stay like 1 Corinthians, but you have 4 or 5 different series of themes. So it feels like you're switching themes all the time, but really you're just parking in 1 Corinthians for the year. And there's some about that I like, but it's really intimidating. I don't know if I'm quite there to pull something like that off yet, but collectively maybe.
Okay. Stand by.
Stand by. We'll continue to work at it. So here we are.
All
Romans.
Right. Romans. Well, we read Romans 1:18 to 32. A real sunshiny passage. This one.
It's nice to talk about God's wrath
and
then send everyone home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good.
Tried not to do that.
Yes. Would you? Yeah. How do you feel about a recap?
Sure. I think. Ultimately what I tried to talk about was really what the whole passage is talking about. You can get lost in the weeds when you talk about sin.
Totally.
Because we end up finding the sin that we either struggle with, or the one that seems to whatever reason really push in on our fears.
Right.
And so you can get really hung up and because this talks a lot about sexual immorality, but it also talks about other sins. Yeah. I didn't want to hone in on a specific sin. I wanted to talk about like the bigger picture, like the doctrine of sin, like the fallenness of man.
Totally.
And that there is the wrath of God, that God is a God of justice and a God of righteousness, but to somehow not stay in a dark place with that. So then talk about again, like what's our response? Like when we see that we are lost, when we know that there is sin because there is death, like what is the response that is supposed to come from that? So we really came across that the Tim Keller quote that I quoted, I think for me was the pivotal. And this is why, I shared, I changed this sermon from what I originally had planned. Same passage, but just a different direction because of the Keller quote. Ultimately talking about when he talks about justice, he says, the majority of justice that we read about in the scripture is restorative justice, not punitive justice. And I think that's why we're afraid to talk about sin, because maybe our experiences are so rooted in punitive justice all the time.
Totally.
And so it's like, oh, well, you have to pay because you have wronged.
Yeah.
In whatever form, whether that's a parent-child or whether that's a workplace thing or whether that how we view God.
Yeah.
And so just trying to talk again about God, the majority of justice that he talks about is restorative.
Yeah.
And how beautiful that is. And so hopefully people got there by the end. But anyway, that's the recap.
I like it. It's great. The more I reread this passage, I felt the weight of it, of God's covenant of faithfulness and the reality of sin and its consequences. I felt the best word I could think of was achy. I felt really achy after reading this passage. I'm a feeler, so
it's a difficult passage.
Let it be. But I wonder, actually, questions might take a different spin this time. I wonder if it's valuable to actually make space for the ache sometimes.
Yeah. No, that's fair.
Because I think sometimes we want to go, that's uncomfortable.
Yeah, solve it.
Run away, fix it. We've got a Band-Aid, let's go.
Right.
And And I mean, sometimes we need the distraction. Sometimes we need to shift our perspective. But sometimes just the recognition of like, there's the tension here and I'm sitting in it.
Mm-hmm.
It's maybe good to give some space to it. So my question to you as a group would be, when you read this passage, is there an ache that rises to the surface for you personally? And maybe share that with your group.
What I will say, after they've paused and hopefully you've talked through that question, and maybe that took a while.
Totally.
Or maybe you didn't know what to say. And that, I think that needs to be okay. Like if you didn't know what to say of, I don't know what I think about that, that's okay. We look at, when we do sermons and when we do studies, you're looking at portions that were meant for bigger context.
100%.
And so there are times where I think, you need to sit in the difficult, but you do need to always remember the bigger context of where was Paul leading the Romans in this entire letter. Yeah. He's leading them into not just, here's the depravity of man, but here's the good news. And then here's the practical application of that good news. Like it's all there. So for moments to just sit in the difficult, that's it. That's okay. Because tomorrow's coming, right? And tomorrow you can talk about something nice. And restoration. Yeah. So that's good. Yeah. Good question.
Thank you. My second question or thought is, you talked about the universal reality of sin. And so the sobering truth is that we all still sin. We don't like it. We're not proud of it. And we see our need. Like my own need to be restored by Christ to me is super obvious. I'm like, yep, I still need him to restore me. So as
a lead pastor, I've been fully restored. So I don't feel that need as much anymore. So someday you guys will get there.
Great.
That's a complete ridiculous comment. The opposite of that is what the truth is.
It's the humor culper in you trying to okay, let's lighten the combo.
That's right.
It's okay.
Yeah, thank you.
So I thought question number 2, if you're willing, share an area of your life, and obviously to your discretion with your group. So, but share an area of your life where you genuinely want to confess your need for God's restoring work in you, in your world. I think that would be a brave thing. And then thirdly, rather than a third question, I actually wondered if it would just be valuable to make space to pray as a group.
Yeah. I think that's good.
Because some of this isn't so much about, depending on how your group takes this passage or what kind of comes to the surface for the people in it, right? In your group, you're going to feel that there's so many trails of thought and of further digging and of further like, hey, God, what are you doing here? What are you up to here? What do you mean here? Like there's just a lot in here.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if it would be valuable to just make space to pray.
Well, and I think out of that thought, like when I got more to the practical application of what we talked about, there was the quote from Chosen season 3 of this week. Like as we were in God's Story, My Story, and as I'm listening through the episode, there's a quote that says, like, he pulled us out of our blindness and into our redemption. And I think, prayer for those that haven't seen Jesus as restorative. They only see God as like the punitive judge in the sky. Like I had multiple conversations this week in multiple areas. One was up at the golf course. I had one in my office with a community member, just about religion in a negative sense. And I think when people talk about religion in a negative sense, I think what they're talking about is this kind of the harsh judge in the sky who is looking to kind of smite me for my sin, right? As opposed to seeing him as like the the righteous judge who wants to redeem and restore all things, who really is the master craftsman of, and I love the analogy of the broken down car that's got all the rust and the dents and this cracked glass, who wants to come and fix the window and pull out the dent and to repaint the car and to get rid of the rust. And like that takes time and effort, and it takes pain, and it takes like removing things and adding things to do all of that restoration, to have this beautiful machinery at the end. And this that God is this master craftsman that knows what he's doing. Even in the midst of demolishing a car, it will get put back together. He knows what he's doing. And we look at our lives and we look at the judgment that we sometimes go through. We go through pain and difficulty. We go through the consequence of our own sin. And we see this as God like trying to hammer us punitively, when actually it's a part of the restoration process to do something really beautiful. And so people are blind to that. There's a blindness, and it talks about that in this passage, the blindness to the world. And so, taking time to pray for the people in our lives, and ourselves included, that are blind to this restoration that God has for us, and that he has for others, and that he wants to call them into. Man, that's the most important thing we could do.
Well, and one of the most beautiful things that we have seen, like we see stories of all through Scripture and in the lives of so many believers over centuries, like that God restores also through the church, through community, through people, right, linking up and binding together. To pray through their aches, to pray through their longings for restoration, to come together in it, to not be isolated and alone in it.
Yeah. Thanks for adding that. That's really important.
Yeah. I think that's all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us today. And thank you. I got a couple emails of encouragement about Afterthoughts.
Cool.
So just thank you to those that have reached out saying thank you for these. And it's good to know that they're making an impact. So that's great.
It's great.